What's up guys, today we are looking at the Nikon Z6III, the latest mirrorless camera in the Nikon Z lineup.
Yes, and a very important and exciting camera for Nikon's range, especially if you're a hybrid shooter. So let's talk about some specs.
So this camera features a brand new 24 megapixel partially stacked full frame sensor. Now, what does partially stacked mean?
Yes, so in traditional cameras with fully stacked sensors, it'll be the complete sensor that is stacked. With the Z6 version 3, it's only the top and the bottom piece, making it a little bit more affordable to manufacture. But the biggest advantage of this is sensor readout. So for speed, this is going to be great. And also in video mode, your rolling shutter effect is heavily reduced. And as you can see by the footage here, it is really, really good. Now the Nikon Z6III features the X-Speed 7 processor, and with this processor you are capable of processing 20 full frame images in RAW.
And it also has a pre-capture function which allows you to capture 1 second before you actually press the shutter button. You do have to half press the shutter to engage that pre-release mode, and it can do this at 120 frames per second in JPEG.
Yes, so capturing special moments or tricky moments like birds is going to be very, very easy with this camera. Now the autofocus system in the Nikon Z6III is amazing. And the funny thing is it actually comes down from the Z9. And as we know, the Z9 features amazing tracking capabilities. This also has the AI-based subject detection mode. So basically, instead of manually selecting human, animal, or vehicle, you can set it to auto mode and the camera will jump between those different subjects. So if you're on a scenario where you're shooting either vehicles and humans at the same time, it will automatically jump, which is a massive benefit.
You kind of automatically choose when to jump between those settings, totally. When I was shooting in the studio with it, I also found whether I was shooting video or stills, I had no issue with the eye tracking on my subject, and it has dual eye tracking as well, where the box floats over both your subject's eyes and you can use the joystick to toggle which eye you wanted to focus on, which is a really nice feature to have.
Yeah, that's great for a model turning the whole time because you can kind of prioritize which eye you want to go towards.
Exactly.
Another thing to mention is the built-in VR, or as some companies call it, IBIS. So the stabilization in this camera in body is rated up to 8.5 stops, depending on the lens you're using as well. But that is pretty decent. Now for handheld stuff, me personally, when I was doing a little bit more video, you could definitely see that it's not the best in the world. But for Nikon's sake, I would say this is a huge step up and a really good improvement. For walking shots, to be honest, I would still recommend a gimbal. It doesn't remove that sort of like walking movement, but general handheld stuff or even just photography movement, pretty decent.
Totally, and I think it's going to still be a while before cameras really get that internal stabilization as good as a gimbal. It's probably going to have to rely on digital stabilization technology to do that in future models. But yeah, I found the stabilization not to be too bad. I was shooting quite wide, so I did have a bit more area to work with. But I do hear what you're saying. The stabilization wasn't as good as, say, some cameras that I've shot on in the past. So one of the main calling cards with the Nikon Z6III is its incredible video capabilities. Now, it's been a long time coming, and I'm really glad that Nikon has finally decided to up their video game.
Yeah, the video in this camera is quite a beast. So you are able to do 6K, 60 frames per second in NRAW. Not only that, you can do 6K, 30 frames in ProRes RAW. So those modes are all recorded internally to the CF Type B card slot, which is already a huge game changer for Nikon. Not only that, but you can do the normal H.265 422 10-bit in Nikon's very nice N-Log.
Yeah, N-Log profile is amazing to grade. I had such a good time throwing that footage into DaVinci and being able to work with the colors. It's such a nice profile to be able to work with.
That is in a resolution of 5.4K at 60 frames. So when you look at the sort of menu and the video selection options of all your recording modes and frame rates, it's crazy. There's a lot of options.
Yeah, there is.
You can also do 4K 120 frames per second. So that's where you see the sort of partially stacked sensor sort of showing you the little beef behind.
Totally, and there's a lot of versatility with this camera as well. One thing you'll notice with this camera is it's a hybrid beast. I mean, honestly, with all those video capabilities that it has, it's the perfect hybrid camera. So now that we've got the tech specs out of the way, let's take a look at the body of the Nikon Z6III.
Yeah, and that's something a lot of users like about Nikon is their touch and feel of their body. I really like the sort of rounded off of the grip. But when we look at some of the ports, they finally changed the HDMI to a full-size HDMI. That should be kind of standard on any camera in my opinion. You've got the normal mic in, headphone out, USB-C. We've got the EL15C battery. Just remember, you need the C battery for the power delivery on the C port. You've got your flippy screen, which is as per normal. You also, of course, have a magnesium body, weather sealed, fairly standard. Something that is unique about this camera, and apparently it is sort of a new spec or sort of the best in the world, is this EVF. You've also mentioned in the studio you noticed something quite heavily.
It's extremely bright and clear using that viewfinder.
And that is because it is 5.7 million dot viewfinder, but it is 400 nits, making this the brightest EVF in the world. Okay, so now that we've got the specs out of the way, let's talk about our sort of opinion on the camera. I mean, you've been shooting it in studio a little bit, and what is your sort of feel about it?
Yeah, for me, I mean, it's really hard to fault this camera. The video capabilities of this camera from Nikon is really good. For me, I found when I was in the studio, like if I really had to nitpick, maybe that megapixel count is a little bit low for some people. For me, personally, I like to shoot at a bit of a higher megapixel count, especially for portraiture studio work. If I want to go in and do like some retouching or sort of some skin color grading after the fact.
Yes, yeah. For me, when it comes to this camera, there's not much to fault with it. I think the only two sort of issues I had with it was the stabilization wasn't the best in its field, but this is something that can be tweaked with firmware updates. We've seen that so much with other camera manufacturers. They constantly tweak the algorithm and change how the sensor or the in-body VR sort of responds to your movement. The other thing was sort of dynamic range and low light. Again, not the best in its field, but having the 6K internal RAW capabilities with this camera, you can definitely do a lot of noise reduction in your editing suite, kind of solving that issue. But overall, great to see Nikon push this sort of hybrid beast into the market and sort of showing that they definitely still have sort of meat in the game in this range.
No, absolutely. I mean, if you're a run and gun photographer who needs to get the most out of your camera in terms of video and stills, this really is a hybrid workhorse, absolutely.
So that's our video on the Nikon Z6III. I hope you guys really enjoyed it.
And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you're new, and we'll see you in the next one.